everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday night live chat. Hope everyone is doing well. And we're going to be talking about harvesting honey. Now, this is the live chat just for students and people that are members of the channel, so it's going to be a much smaller group. So please feel free to post questions as you have them. They can be about what I'm talking about or something else, and I'll just get to it when I can. Pardon me. Much better. If you're comfortable with it, it's always great to see who's in the chat. If you want to put them in the comments, first name is sufficient. Because if I'm familiar with you, or if you want to put in just where you live, that's also helpful. So I can be a little bit more specific to the areas that you guys are tuning in from. Hi, Ty. Nice to see you. And all right. So we're going to be talking about harvesting honey. And I am going to be posting a video to YouTube this weekend about it as well. But we want to talk about how much to harvest, when to harvest, how much to leave the bees, and what we're doing this time of year. Now, first, this doesn't have to be as complicated as as people sometimes think it is. It's maybe not always incredibly simple, but I will say that here in Eastern Pennsylvania, by early July, you can harvest your honey. I was even talking to a beekeeper in Texas, and he was saying that a lot of people in Texas are harvesting honey by early July. And although the bees are still going to be bringing in honey, and it's so early still in the summer, the big season for the beekeepers here in Eastern Pennsylvania, it's over by early July. People are harvesting. And so for a lot of you guys in the United States, it is safe to say that you can be harvesting your honey by the 4th of July. The only exception to that is that some of the people in the warmer states are maybe going to have another harvest. So in Hawaii, there was the Brazilian pepper tree that bloomed around now, or more like July. It's pretty much maybe early August, and so you had a second bloom. But for most people, by early July, you are good to harvest. If you are not positive, what you can do is really just go through the inspection sheets. So what I saw, because I am in a different climate zone, is that it was slow. The bees are building, it was slowly growing, and then all of a sudden, end of May-ish, it just went crazy, and it was hard to keep up with the bees. The brood boxes were filling up. There were queen cells everywhere. Putting supers on top, the bees, the population's out of control. Everything's just growing so fast. And then it just stopped. It just stops. And that's really when you are going to be harvesting your honey. But what's most important isn't that you harvest your honey on time, is that you have your varroa mite levels low for mid to end of summer, because this is a really crucial time. And a big problem, a big thing that I see beekeepers, this mistake that they make is that they are very much concerned about doing everything right and perfect when they first get their bees. But then when it comes to the most important thing that they have to do, which is making sure their varroa mite levels are low for the middle and end of summer, they just kind of are like, nah, I don't really feel like doing that. That's not fun. And this late summer now is when the queen bees are starting to lay their eggs for the winter bees. The winter bees' fat deposits are a little bit different. Their just genetic makeup is different than that of the bees that are currently in your hive right now. Now, I don't know. I'm assuming that the queen isn't laying eggs for winter bees when warm climates, but I'm not positive about that. But what I do know is in areas where you get a frost, when it is considerably cold out and the bees need to cluster up, when it is below 55 Fahrenheit and the bees are clustering up, those winter bees need to be healthy so that they can cluster up and be strong. So if you were doing a mite test and your mite levels are over like 3 in a sampling of bees, or you don't even have to do a mite test, to be honest, that first year, just put in a treatment to lower your varroa mite levels, because that is really going to be a huge factor in deciding whether your bees survive the winter or not. Now, if your bees swarmed, then you might not have to treat because you had a break in your brood, and that is how bees naturally deal with varroa mites. But if you did not have a break in the laying of bees in your hive, then there's a good chance that you are going to need to treat for varroa mites. So that's really the big question, isn't like, is it time to treat? Or is it time to feed or not? It's like, is it time to treat? Because if it is, you want to take that excess honey out before you put a treatment in. So for a lot of the United States, it's July, and for even other people that are not in the United States but are on the same calendar as us, and cold weather is coming come October, November, it's probably early July as well. And honestly, if this is your first year, it's always better to do something too early than to do it too late. So harvest a little bit early, and if another huge bloom comes, that's not the worst thing that could happen, and you can always take a few frames out and put them in the freezer and hold on to them until next year, or just do a crush and strain and squish them over a strainer. And it's a pretty easy process that I have in the course. It does not take long at all, and all you do is put a strainer over a bucket and let it sit. And it really is just like 20 minutes to harvest a couple of frames. So the question is also, how much feed are we? How much honey can we take, and how much do we leave the bees? And another generic answer that is good for a lot of the United States is 35 pounds. Here in Pennsylvania, they really say that you want a minimum of 30 pounds on your hive for winter. 35 pounds is what other people have said. North of us, we're talking like, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, people in those areas might be leaving upwards of like 40 to 50 pounds. Um, but you really want to leave at least 30 pounds of honey in the hive if you are expecting a cold winter from, December through to March, so that your bees aren't starving and so that they're not just eating candy, fondant, food that isn't the best for them and their digestive system. Now, this year was a pretty terrible year. I'm really hoping that this isn't what it's like and this isn't the average, but it was very rainy. It's rains almost every single day. It's so wet out all the time. And the beekeeping season started almost a month late. I was supposed to pick up my bees at the end of March, and they didn't come till April 20th or 19th or something. So we got like a 3 week late start on the season, and it's been incredibly rainy, which um, isn't terrible, but depending on the flowers that are in your area, it could be causing the flowers to fall off, or for plants to start to just the ground just gets a little bit too wet. This morning, a lot of my flowers had fallen over. I have a lot of borage, and the bees love it, and they are all over those plants. But it produces a ton of flowers, and they can get a little top heavy and fall over. And I don't know if it just rained really hard or if there was a lot of wind. I didn't hear either sleeping last night, but a lot of them, and my um, marigolds had fallen over when I checked on them this morning. So depending on the kind of flowers there are, the intense rain that we've had this summer could be the cause for a lack of food for your bees to forage. So we have usually by the end of July or end of June, early July is when a lot of beekeepers it's safe for them to harvest honey. How much honey you can harvest, usually you want to leave them like about 30 pounds. And that is just weighing it. A lot of beekeepers just seem to think that like you just take the honey super off of your hive and leave them whatever's in the brood boxes. But I prefer to be a little bit more involved in what's going on in the beehive than that. I don't like to tell the bees what to do, but I don't like to make assumptions. And so 30 pounds is a good amount of honey, but I'm not just saying, oh, there must be honey in the brood boxes and that's enough. If there isn't a lot of honey in the brood boxes, then I am taking honey from supers, and I am taking empty frames that maybe have drawn out comb but don't have any weight to them and don't have any brood in them, and I am putting honey frames from my honey supers into the brood boxes. You can put a medium frame into a deep box. It's during the times of year when bees are festooning and building lots of comb, it's not ideal to do a lot of that on their second brood box, the upper one. I have seen them build comb off of the shorter frames and connect it to the box below. But that first box, the lowest brood box on your hive, you can put any size frame you want to in that box. The bees will either build comb off of the bottom of the frame or they won't, and there will just be a gap. So you can put any size frame you want to in that box at any time. And this time of year, you don't have to be too worried about bees building honeycomb. They're kind of done with that phase of their life. They're over it. They might a little bit if needed, but this is not the time of year when you put comb honey containers into your beehive, and this is not the time of year that you worry about bees really building lots of comb. I see a little bit of festooning in my hive, but not very much. So, um, this is the time of year that you are just tallying up how much honey is in the hive and seeing if you need to take anything from your honey supers and put them into your deeps, and then what excess there is that you can take. You can always go to bee clubs and ask around. It doesn't have to be your club. It can be a club in your state or in the state next door, or you can just, I mean, even Reddit and Facebook groups and forums are places to ask. I just want to, like, just take one person's answer as gospel and just go by it. You ask around and you go to different places and ask around and get a variety of answers. Um, but 30 pounds minimum if you have a cold winter where you're getting snow. And if you don't have that much, then you don't have that much, and you're going to have to make sure that there is enough candy in the hive for them to be able to eat in those cold winter months. Does anyone have any questions about that part of harvesting honey, figuring out how much honey to leave in their hive, or exactly when they should be harvesting? Leave it below in the comments. And so there's also just a question of whether honey is ripe or not. If it's there's nectar and there's honey, and nectar is what the bees gather and it's liquid, but it has a lot of water in with it and a little bit of sugar. And so the bees pass it off, and they sits in their honey crop, and then they put it in cells and fan their wings, and they evaporate a lot of the moisture out of the cells, and then it turns into honey. The bees turn it into honey. And when it has a very low moisture content, they will start to close up the cell and put a thin beeswax capping over it. And so this is what we consider like honey when it's honey or ripe. And that's what you want to be harvesting. You don't want to be taking frames that are cells are open. If you shake a frame and you see like moisture flying out, that is not okay to harvest. You want to take frames that are at least 75% capped, and you want to harvest on days that are not high humidity, because I did a live chat a few months ago about honey and all the things, ways that it can go bad. And that is a way that your honey can ferment, is when a lot of moisture is added to it during the process of harvesting. And so, especially if you live in humid areas like Hawaii, Florida, Georgia, you really want to harvest on days that aren't so humid. Janice says, so if you're adding honey from a super to the deep box, what are you pulling to make room? There must be, there's going to be empty frames that they might have drawn out comb, or they might be totally empty, but there's nothing in the cells. Or it might be a frame that has some honey in it, but it's very minimal. Uh, I, I mean, in my hives, I am not seeing at this point, like, two deep boxes with 20 frames full of just solid brood wall to wall and no honey, because the queen's not laying like that anymore. She's really just like slowed down in her laying. Uh, if you are seeing, like all of the frames that aren't totally full of brood, just totally full of honey, then you probably have enough honey in the hive and you don't have to worry about this. Todd says, can you harvest if you fed your bees a large part of the season? Well, if you were feeding your bees when there were supers on the hive, then you might not want to harvest that honey. You really don't want to harvest when you have honey supers on the hive. If you were feeding and there were still just deep boxes on, then you don't have to worry about it. Anything that was in those honey supers, it really just depends on when you were feeding. If you were feeding um, and those honey boxes were on the hive, then I wouldn't harvest, or at the very least, like, try a little bit, pull one frame out and, maybe just do the crush and strain method over a sieve and put that directly into jars and see how that tastes. So at the very least, you're not like mixing frames together in case one frame does have syrup from you feeding your bees and another frame is honey. But you really just and if you really are concerned that there is syrup mixed in with this, then I would be a little bit more inclined to just hold on to those frames and put them in the freezer and feed them back to the bees for next year, as opposed to harvesting and putting it in jars and potentially having some not so good tasting honey that you harvested. Another thing I want to mention is that I have said to people that probably your first year you shouldn't expect to harvest anything. And if you aren't sure how much to leave the bees, you can always just leave them everything and see what's left come springtime. If you have like two full honey supers on your hive, then that's probably excessive and unnecessary. So like when I mention things like these aren't like, these hard rules that you have to go by. These are just uh just like things to keep in mind. This isn't an option, but overall still what you want to do is just be an observer. You are there, not to tell the bees what to do, not to say, like, today is July 3rd, and this is the day I harvest honey, and today I am going to take 20 pounds of honey because that's what I do every single year at the same time. That's not what beekeeping is about. That's not how nature works, and you just can't do go by these like hard rules every single year. You have to see what they have and then what is considered excess and then what can be taken. But you do not ever have to harvest honey. Honey can always just be for the bees and not for the beekeeper. There's just two things to know if you leave your bees everything. And one is that it is not always good to leave the bees everything, because there is just this balance, this like perfect balance that is needed within your beehive. Just like in order to prevent swarming, you need this balance as well. You need there to be enough space for honey as well as brood. And when that becomes off balance, then the bees want to swarm, even if there is space in the hive. And so when there's not a lot of food coming into the hive, the queen will stop laying so much, and the hive starts to prepare for winter. You might find more propolis in the hive. The hive is like gluing itself up, it's getting ready. It takes a lot, it's a lot of work for them preparing for winter. And so they're starting this process now. As soon as the amount of flowers blooming decreases, they start to get ready for winter. um, Reminds me of, we were just watching A Bug's Life, the Pixar movie, with my kids last night. Uh, and so they're already, even though it officially just became summer less than a month ago, they're already getting ready for this decrease, and the population is going down. And if your hive has a ton of honey in it, but the population goes down, then they will be a big target for robbing. And so when there's not a lot of flowers blooming, the bees and wasps will rob each other. And the hives that are the strongest and brought in the most honey are often the ones that will be targeted the biggest and will have the most robbing. So you can decrease their entrance, but if you don't catch it early enough, and especially if you even have feed inside the hive, and so the bees can smell, maybe that amino boost or those essential oils and stuff, they might not be able to defend all of that honey. I mean, it kind of I feel like I'm describing this as if the bees are, you know, going through a war, but it kind of is. Like every year there's like this war that goes on amongst the beehives, and they all fight each other for the food and to be the ones that make it. Because not all hives can make it, but every hive wants to be one of the hives that does make it. And so they will destroy the other colonies if that means that they are the ones with enough food to survive winter. And they are ruthless. Honeybees are ruthless and they are not nice to each other. So, those big hives, the ones that were your best hive in summer, and the weakest hives are the ones that usually don't survive. So, if you want to leave your bees all of that food, just keep an eye on it. Keep an eye out for robbing. If you want me to explain what that looks like, let me know, and I will go over that as well. You want to keep an eye on robbing, and you want to just keep an eye on the population. Because it's not only honeybees, but small hive beetles that can start to take over those honey frames that are not being defended and are kind of just empty up there. So you can, what I did in Hawaii was I had a chest freezer and I just put excess frames in there. And then I gave them back to the bees. What I usually just had two deeps or just two boxes for brood. The first box was usually almost all brood and maybe a frame or two of honey. And the second box was usually about half brood. And the rest I filled up with honey. And I took the excess, but I never harvested all of it. I kept some to feed back. And for those of you in warmer climates with a very mild winter, I highly recommend doing that. So the thing is that if you hold on to honey, it will crystallize. And then say you want to not harvest until springtime, there's a good chance that the bees are going to eat this honey in the springtime when there's not a lot of flowers blooming. But even if there is honey left over in springtime, there's a good chance it will be crystallized and you will not be able to spin it or crush it to get it out. So you just have to hold on to that as feed for the bees. And it is great feed for springtime when there's not a lot of flowers blooming. And it's great feed when you split hives to put in a couple frames of this honey. You can put honeycomb, frames of honey, in the freezer, and that will delay the crystallization process quite a bit. And that's how I stored my comb honey like that I was selling. If you put honey in the refrigerator, it's actually going to accelerate the crystallization of the honey. So even though the refrigerator will keep it safe from getting eaten by all those bugs, you're almost going to guarantee that it's going to be crystallized in like a month or so. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. If you want to leave your bees all the honey, that you're probably not going to be able to harvest it for yourself come the springtime. It's going to be just your feed. And freezers are much better for storing frames of honey than refrigerators. Broken chest freezers and broken refrigerators work well as long as that gasket that seals it up is solid and it's clean inside. You just put it in a freezer for like 24 hours and then take it out and put it into the broken refrigerator or chest freezer. And that's something that I used to do when my chest freezer was full. That was my backup. And I was living in a shack that had it was a studio. It used to be the Queen grafting shack for Big Island Queens. It had a hot plate and a mini fridge, like a mini fridge you see in the dorm rooms. But I still had a chest freezer. It couldn't fit in the shack. It was outside, but I still had that for storing my honeycomb. So even with very minimal very small living quarters for myself, one of the few things I bought as a beekeeper very early on was a chest freezer. Some of you people are like, what do I do with my honeycomb over winter? What am I supposed to do before I feed it back to the bees? That's really the best answer, is to just have a chest freezer or a spare freezer. Todd says, can you harvest oh, never mind, I answered that question. T. Tracy, I just tested a hive and found 3% mites. I was going to use Formic Pro or Viroxan because that's what I have. Would you harvest honey and then treat, or treat immediately? Well, you should treat immediately and then, you should treat, you should harvest immediately and then treat. So if you're going to use the Formic, which is a good time of year to use Formic, because a Formic can cause queen loss, which is a reason why I'm not a huge fan of it, and I try not to use it. The place I work for had to use it. every year, and they had a decent queen wasp as well. But this time of year, it causes your queen to not lay so much. But if you do have queen wasps, there are still a lot of places selling queens. So your hive can recover if that happens. So this is a great time to use Formic. There are temperature restrictions, but you can usually find this gap when it's not so hot out that you can put the Formic in for a few days. Um, you can use Roxanne as well, but oxalic acid, which is what Roxanne is really a great way to treat for mites in the fall. And so to use the same thing, two treatments in a row, is a little silly because you're okay. How's that? Can you guys see me now? I think all of the thunderstorms tonight are okay, great. Like the thunderstorms tonight are messing with the internet here. I don't know what is up with this internet all the time. Okay, if anybody has any questions about their honey harvesting or anything related to their bees, now is a great time to ask them while I try to remember what I was talking about. I Okay, so we talked about how much honey to harvest, when to harvest. Your honey should be at least 75% capped. The more capped, the better. The less the chance that it's going to ferment. Honey can last forever with low moisture content. Different honeys have different moisture contents, and high humid areas can cause just more moisture in the air means more moisture can get into your honey. Even in Hawaii, where it was pretty humid, I didn't have too many issues with my honey fermenting, but it can happen. I have never used or bought a refractometer. You can. It is a device to measure the moisture content in honey. I used to sell my honey, but I just never really found it necessary. I was just a little bit more overly cautious with harvesting and harvesting when it wasn't really humid out and going for the frames that were like 80-90% capped. So you can just leave your bees all the honey on the hive if you want to, but just keep in mind that it might be too crystallized come springtime, so you won't be able to harvest it for your own consumption. It's going to be more like feed honey. And putting honey in refrigerators will accelerate the crystallization process. Freezing will slow it down. And you can always store it in a refrigerator, freezer, and give it back to them right before you close your hive up for winter, come October, November, if you like. Two of my beehives, I currently have 4 hives in my backyard. I started with 3. One hive swarmed. It was really a stupid mistake on my part. I thought I saw the queen, but she looked small. I was seeing almost no brood in the hive and queen cells. But that day, I had other stuff that I wanted to do, and I thought I could just split them the next day after I got some cinder blocks and had everything set up. But I waited too long, and 2 days later, she was gone. So I split the other hive that was in the same exact situation, but I still saw the queen. Lots of queen cells. Queen cells were even some of them were capped. Both of those hives, one hive successfully requeened and she is laying, and the other hive did not. So I bought a queen locally. I put her in the hive last week on Monday, and I opened the hive up on Thursday and she was walking around the hive. Now, I did not take the cork out. there was a candy cork and the other cork in the cage, and the bees ate both of them. This wasn't the wooden cages that have the corks on either end. This was a plastic cage, and just one end had the regular cork and then the candy cork after it. And they just, in 3 days, they had chewed out the regular cork and the candy and let her out. Thankfully, they didn't kill her, because when bees are that, I don't know, eager to get to the queen, it often is not a good sign. And this hive, although the population seemed pretty high, it had been queenless for a while. There was absolutely no brood, like not even any capped brood in the hive. So I was really surprised that the population was still so high. I had split them in June, like June 18th or something. Like it was not, it was a it was a while ago, maybe June 12th. Um, and and the hive's population was still pretty high, and so they have recovered, and she is now laying. I did not harvest anything. My bees have not brought in much honey in this area, so I'm actually considering moving them. Uh, hasn't been a great year temperature wise. There's been a lot of rain, but because they just haven't brought in a lot of honey, I think that I should really put them in a place where there's going to be more food for them to forage, because um, even with all the rain, I think they should have brought in a little bit more honey than what they did. So right now we have 4 hives, and I am was going to put the apical guard in my hive last night, but then these massive thunderstorms came out, and it's good to put it in later in the evening, because it can be a little sensitive to heat and high temperatures. Though you can put apical guard in the hive when it is like, I think, up to like 100 or 105. But once it's over 77 degrees Fahrenheit, you do want to put like a half a dosage. So I wanted to put it in later in the evening when it wasn't so hot and the smell wouldn't be so strong as it would be if it was, in the middle of the day and sunny. But these mid and late afternoon thunderstorms have really put a damper on this. So I'm hoping tomorrow apical guard will be going into the hive. I have my formic acid already to put into, no, my oxalic acid to put into the hive come probably October, based off of last year when it was still in the 80s, come the end of October. And, I saw Marilyn says that her hive has not brought in much honey either. Had her queen and she's working hard. Is it too late for them to make honey? It really just varies in the area, what's blooming. I would like to plant some fruit trees. Fruit trees are really great food source for bees. Trees are really great food source for bees. Like the borage is great, but since I don't have like a huge amount of acreage to plant a ton of wildflowers, trees are a better option for me. And I'd like to have some fruit. I'm not like a great gardener. Fruit trees are a little bit more my style. Um, um, but I filmed a video last week, and I was going to post it, but I didn't get to because a friend of the family passed away, and I just wasn't really in the mood to work on the video after the funeral. It just wasn't really a great frame of mind I was in. So um, I made this video about when to harvest honey, and I pulled a frame of honey out of the hive, and there was like 1 or 2 bees on this frame. I got them all off before I closed the hive up, and I went to go shoot the video, and the neighbor starts mowing his lawn, and it's like a Wednesday. I don't understand. He just always mows his lawn whenever I'm about to film. I don't know how he knows, but he starts up his lawnmower. So I take the frame and I put it next to the garage, and I go in the house thinking like it's like 90 degrees out. It is 1 in the afternoon. He can't possibly be out there for that long mowing the lawn. I mean, I would think he would be melting and hot, but 2 or 3 hours later, he finally stops, and this frame is covered in bees. Covered. They are just, I have it in the video. I tried to hold the frame up, but like bees were just smacking me in the face and about to fly in my mouth, and I just couldn't even talk. There were so many bees around me, and they devoured that frame, and it was gone. It was totally empty. Um, in like 2 or 3 hours. So that my bees are hungry. Long story short, my bees are very hungry. So I did put syrup in the hives, and they are festooning. They are building combs still, which is a little odd, but they I don't expect them to bring in much honey. I'm just really hoping at this point that they're not going to be getting robbed too much and losing honey. Now I do have a hive scale on one of my beehives, the Wi-Fi hive scale from O'Keefe Electronics. I contacted them, and I'm going to be making a video about hive scales and using them, and it's been really interesting to see how the weight has changed. And now is the time that I really wanted a hive scale to just see how the weight changes and to understand, get a better idea of robbing when that happens, so that I can take appropriate measures when needed. It wasn't something that I really had to deal with in Hawaii so much. I mean, I'm sure there was robbing that happened, but I was constantly moving my bees to new locations to deal with robbing. And since my bees were never on my property, it was annoying to move my bees, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Now that my bees are on my property and I'd like to keep them on my property, I am more concerned with robbing because they are obviously not getting as much food as they would like. And so robbing is really the next step that happens among the bees. Um, so if you have tons of blooming flowers and will for another couple weeks, then they will make honey. But they're less likely to be making honey like a considerable amount. I mean, they're this is a tricky time because it's warm out and they're gathering food and they're leaving the hive, so they're using energy, and so they need to eat. And so at the very least, you just really want them to be gathering enough honey to sustain the hive so that they are not eating into their winter food storage. That's really like um, what you're hoping your bees are doing right now. Earlier in the year, when there was like a huge nectar bloom, they were supposed to be gathering excess. Their population should have been really high, and they were gathering excess. If you are seeing that their population has decreased, then that is the bees telling you that there's not as much that needs to be done in the hive. There's not as much food coming in. And so now they are just sustaining the hive and not eating into their food storage. So really just looking at what's going on in the hive and what it looks like and how many bees are in there in comparison to earlier in the year will really give you insight into what's probably going on in your environment and how much that they're bringing in. Anna says approximately how much is 30 pounds of honey frame wise? Um, the best thing to do is to take a scale with you. Like I had just one of those little $10 kitchen scales, which is really helpful in making body products and soaps and candles. And I would just weigh the frames. The frames can vary. And if you say like to space your frames out, so you had 9 frames in a 10 frame box, your frames are going to be fatter. But like a medium sized frame is going to be like maybe so that's like a general rule of thumb, but they can really vary like a lot. And their weight. So the best thing to do is you put it on a hive scale, and even if you're not going to be harvesting, you just bring the little scale out with you and just stick some frames on it. Or if you have a regular scale that you use for yourself, then that works too. I think those little kitchen scales, they might max out at like 10 or 12 pounds. But usually those frames don't weigh more than 5-ish. Okay. So it is almost 9 o'clock. Thank you to everyone that joined in the live chat. It's nice to see everybody. I am considering moving this chat to the daytime, like maybe 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. If that sounds great to you, or you're not going to be able to make it if I do that, please leave it in the comments. I just I feel like a lot of people have said that this is too late for them, but I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, so I cannot do 7 o'clock is bedtime, 5 o'clock is dinner, and 6 o'clock is just you know, and between dinner and bedtime time is not really, that's like whiny time, I think. So it's 4 o'clock is usually when I start cooking dinners. So 3 o'clock would be the absolute latest, or then we move on to 8. But since my other chat is at 8 o'clock, I am open to moving it to an earlier time to accommodate people that want to join the chat earlier in the day. If anyone else has any questions about their bees and what's going on with them right now, let me know. Put it in the chat. And you always have my email that you can contact when you have questions as well. I feel like there was one other thing I was going to mention, but I can't remember. So I will put it in next time. Oh, I did want to mention to you guys, this is getting, it's now the heat of the summer heat. And so the bees, I stopped putting salt in my water source now that they are going to the water all the time. And I noticed that they stopped going and gathering water. But I started adding salt to it again. And I noticed that the bees are going to the water quite a bit more than when it was just plain water. So I strongly encourage everyone to not just give their bees some kind of water, but to add a teaspoon of non-iodized sea salt or non-iodized salt to a quart of water when they're giving their bees water. They really seem to prefer it. And on a side note is the squirrels are also, I found a squirrel in the water bowl, like in the whole bowl, just laying there flat on his belly yesterday. And the bumblebees, and I saw a leafcutter bee in the water source, and all different kinds of bee mick flies and stuff. So it's really fun to see all the different pollinators visiting the water, and adding salt to it seems to help quite a bit to attract them. So I think this salt actually is something that they are looking for or need, or like in some way, which I don't blame them. Who doesn't like salt? So thanks for joining me. See you in a couple weeks for the next live chat, which is on Friday night. Janice, yes, I do sea salt, actually, non-iodized sea salt, but you can do non-iodized regular table salt if you like. And if you missed the first part of the live chat, you can always go to the link in the email and click on that to replay it. So have a good night, everybody, and see you next time.